Jackson Hayes had never imagined that his life would change so dramatically because of one letter. He was a soldier, a warrior, and his life had always been about battles, missions, surviving the harsh realities of space wars. But today, everything was different. The letter he held in his hands was an invitation, not just any invitation, the one to attend a royal wedding on a planet that was light years away from Earth. The invitation came from the Drakari Kingdom, a powerful and ancient race known across the galaxy for their strength, pride, and fierce warrior traditions. At first, Jackson thought it was a mistake. Why would the Drakari invite a human to something as sacred as a royal wedding? He had fought in a few battles alongside Drakari soldiers, but he wasn't a member of their alliance or even someone they particularly liked. By all alien races, and the Drakari were no exception. But the invitation was clear. His presence was requested at the royal wedding of Princess Aliana, the king's eldest daughter. There was no mistake. The invitation was real. Jackson sat down at the small desk in his quarters, running his fingers over the fancy alien script on the letter. He could barely understand the language, but his translator device handled it with ease. The message was short but formal. We request your presence at the wedding of Princess Aliana to unite the Drakari and Zerathians. Your strength and honor are recognized. We welcome you. Jackson didn't understand. What did his strength and honor have to do with a royal wedding? He wasn't a diplomat, nor was he someone who enjoyed fancy ceremonies. He had never attended a royal wedding before, and he didn't care for the politics that often came with such events. But he couldn't ignore it. The Drakari were a powerful species, and he had earned their respect during his previous missions. Maybe this was some form of recognition for his past work. After much thought, Jackson made up his mind. He was going not because he wanted to, but because turning down an invitation from the Drakari could be seen as an insult. He was a soldier, and soldiers didn't refuse invitations from powerful kings or queens, especially not from the Drakari. So he packed his things, set his course for the Drakari home planet, and left Earth behind. Arrival on Drakari Prime. Planet Drakari Prime was nothing like Earth. It was a world of vast deserts, towering mountains, and deep ancient forests. The air was thick with the smell of foreign plants and the sounds of alien wildlife. Jackson felt like a stranger in a world so different from his own. He'd been on alien planets before, but this was different. He was walking on the soil of a kingdom that had been around for millennia, a kingdom that had never fully trusted humanity. As Jackson entered the grand capital city of Coronadak, he couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer size and strength of everything around him. The buildings were enormous, carved from stone and metal, with sharp angular edges that looked like they had been forged by the hands of ancient gods. Alien soldiers stood at attention, their armor glinting under the twin suns. It was a city built for warriors, a city that demanded respect from anyone who entered. Jackson walked through the city streets, his boots clicking against the stone as he followed the directions given to him by his guide. He couldn't help but notice the people around him. They weren't like humans at all. The Drakari were tall, with thick scales covering their bodies and sharp features that gave them an intimidating appearance. Their eyes, a deep shade of amber, glowed with a quiet power. They moved with a grace that came from years of training. In war, finally, he reached the royal palace, a massive structure that looked like it had been built into the side of a mountain. Guards stood at every entrance, their weapons held firmly in their hands. Jackson was led through a series of grand halls, each more ornate than the last, till they reached the royal chapel where the wedding would take place. He could already hear the sounds of the ceremony beginning in the distance. A strange sense of foreboding. As Jackson entered the chapel, he felt a strange sense of foreboding. The room was decorated with massive banners, each one bearing the sigil of the Drakari royal family. A huge altar stood at the center, surrounded by intricate carvings of past battles and victories. The air was thick with incense, and the soft hum of alien music filled the room, setting an eerie, mystical atmosphere at the front of the chapel. Princess Aliana stood beside her chosen groom, a tall and imposing Zerothian warrior named Korak. The Zerothians were a fierce race, known for their brutal strength and their unyielding nature. Jackson had fought alongside Zarathian warriors before, but he had never seen one like Korak. The man looked every bit the part of the feared warrior. His armor was covered in spikes, and his eyes burned with a fiery intensity. But it wasn't. Korak, that caught Jackson's attention, it was Princess Aliana. She stood tall and regal, her long silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes, a striking shade of violet, scanned the room with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. She was beautiful, more beautiful than any woman Jackson had ever seen. But there was something in her eyes that made him wonder if she was truly happy about this union. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, and he couldn't help but feel a strange pull, as though fate itself had connected their paths. Jackson quickly pushed the thought aside. He was a soldier, not a prince. He didn't belong in this world of royalty and politics. He was here as an observer, not as a participant. But as the ceremony continued, Jackson felt his heart race. Something was about to happen, something he couldn't yet understand. The trial of the chosen, just as the wedding vows were about to be exchanged. The doors of the chapel slammed open with a deafening bang. The room went silent as a new figure entered. He was tall, clad in dark armor that seemed to absorb the light around him. His presence was powerful, almost otherworldly, and Jackson immediately recognized him for what he was: Zarathian warlord, an enemy of the royal family. His name was Varrock, and he had come to challenge the union. "I do not recognize this union," Varrock said, his voice cold and commanding. "The princess should be mine, not this weak warrior." The room erupted into murmurs as the guests exchanged nervous glances. Jackson could feel the tension rising in the air. The Drakari were proud warriors, and they would not tolerate such an insult. The king, King Vilar, stepped forward, his voice booming through the chapel. "Varrock, you dare challenge the royal bloodline?" King Vilar's tone was sharp, but there was a sense of calm authority in his voice. "The law of the Drakari is clear. If a challenger steps forward, they must prove their worth in combat. If you defeat the chosen warrior, you may take the princess. If not, you will leave in disgrace." Varrock sneered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "I accept your challenge." Your room fell silent as all eyes turned to Jackson. He had no desire to fight, but this was the law of the Drakari. He had been invited here to witness a wedding, not to become part of a royal dispute. Yet, without thinking, Jackson stepped forward. "I'll fight," Jackson said, his voice steady. Despite the rising tension, a fight to remember, Jackson had fought in countless battles. But this was unlike any challenge he had ever faced. He knew the Drakari style of combat, but this was not just any fight. It was a fight for honor, for the princess, and for the future of the Drakari kingdom. As he faced off against Varrock, he could see the cold confidence in the Zarathians' eyes. The battle was fierce. Varrock was strong, his blows landing with the force of a crashing asteroid. But Jackson was quick, using his agility to dodge and counterattack. The fight moved with brutal speed, each of them striking at the other with weapons forged for war. But Jackson had something that Varrock didn't. He fought for more than just glory. He fought for survival. The battle seemed to last forever. But with a final, well-placed strike, Jackson disarmed Varrock and sent him to the ground. The room fell into stunned silence. The unexpected result, King Vilar stepped forward, his voice filled with awe. "By the laws of the Drakari, you have defeated the challenger. You are the victor, Jackson Hayes, and the princess is now bound to you." Jackson's heart raced as he looked at Princess Aliana, who now stood before him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, he saw something more than just royal duty in her gaze, something that felt like destiny, the wedding that was meant to unite them. Drakari and Zarathians had turned into something Jackson never could have predicted. He had come as a guest, but now he stood as a warrior married to the king's eldest daughter. Jackson Hayes stood frozen, the weight of the moment settling in as the room around him buzzed with shock and disbelief. What had started as an ordinary invitation to a royal wedding had now turned into something far more complicated, far more dangerous. He had no idea what the future held, But the Princess Aliana stood before him, her violet eyes locked with his. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, something he had never felt in any battle or war. It wasn't just about fighting anymore, it was about protecting something far more precious than just his life. The Drakari king stepped forward, his voice booming across the room. Jackson Hayes, you have proven your worth and honor. By the ancient law of the Drakari, you are the victor. And as per the custom, the princess is now bound to you. The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore. Jackson had never expected this. He had come here as a guest, as a soldier to witness an event of high importance. He wasn't here to fight for the throne. Yet somehow he had defeated Varrock, the powerful Zarathian warlord, in front of everyone. Now he was standing as the prince consort, the husband of Princess Aliana, the king's eldest daughter. How had this happened? Princess Aliana didn't move. Her gaze was still fixed on Jackson, but there was a storm behind her eyes. She seemed both surprised and deeply troubled. She stepped back, her royal robes flowing around her like a silver cloud. This is not what I wanted, she whispered to herself, though loud enough for Jackson to hear. Her voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable tension in the air. Jackson wanted to say something, to offer words of comfort, but nothing felt right. He was a warrior, not a diplomat. He'd never been trained to handle royal matters or court politics. The king turned to the gathered guests, his voice calm but authoritative. This marriage is not just a joining of two people, but a union of strength between our kingdoms. We must show unity. The Drakari are powerful, but our enemies are many. This union will bring peace, stability, and prosperity. His words were meant to reassure the assembly, but Jackson noticed the subtle glances exchanged between some of the nobles. Not all of them were convinced that a human could truly join their royal family. The Drakari, like many other species, had long believed themselves to be superior to humans. They viewed the human race as little more than a collection of warriors with limited potential. The ceremony should have continued, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jackson's victory had not just shattered the royal wedding, it had shaken the very foundation of Drakari traditions. As Jackson looked around the room, he saw that most of the Drakari were not pleased by the result. It was a challenge to their way of life, and many would not accept it easily. The unexpected challenge as Jackson tried to comprehend the situation. A strange noise echoed through the hall, a deep, resonant rumble that made the walls seem to vibrate. Suddenly, the doors at the far end of the chapel flew open with a loud crash, and another figure entered. This time, there was no mistaking the threat in the air. A tall, imposing figure stepped forward, his presence almost overwhelming. He was clad in dark armor, covered in battle scars, and with eyes that glowed with a menacing red hue. This was another Zarathian, but this one was different from Varrock. He was older, more experienced, and more dangerous. The room fell into stunned silence as the new figure approached the altar. His voice cut through the silence like a knife. You dare insult the Zarathian people by allowing a human to marry your princess? The voice was harsh, filled with rage. I challenge this farce. I challenge this marriage. Jackson didn't know who this new Zarathian was, but his presence was enough to send a chill down his spine. The man's eyes locked onto Jackson, sizing him up with a cold, calculating gaze. I am Commander Korak, the figure introduced himself, and I will not allow my people to be humiliated. The princess belongs to the Zarathians, not to a human. A murmur ran through the crowd. Korak was a name that Jackson had heard of, one of the most feared warriors in the Zarathian army. He was known for his brutality, for leading his forces in countless battles across the galaxy. But Jackson didn't flinch. He had fought more than enough battles to know that fear had no place on the battlefield. King Vilair stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the room. Commander Korak, you know the law of the Drakari. If you challenge the Union, you must face a trial by combat. You cannot simply demand a change of fate. Korak's laugh was cold and dismissive. I know the law, Velor, and I am ready to face whatever challenge you present. The king's eyes narrowed, but there was no turning back now. The challenge was issued, and it was law. "Very well," Wheeler said with a heavy sigh. "A trial of combat. The winner claims the princess, the loser leaves in disgrace." Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't want to fight again. He had already won his victory, but there was no choice now. The Drakari customs were clear, and the eyes of the kingdom were upon him. He had to fight for the right to keep his place in the royal family. But more than that, he had to protect Aliana. She was the future of the kingdom, and he had just promised to stand by her side. Jackson turned to face Korak, his mind focused. On the battle ahead, he knew he was a skilled warrior, but Korak was no ordinary opponent. He was a commander, a battle-hardened veteran, and the Drakari royal family had always placed the highest value on strength. Jackson had no idea what the future held, but he knew this fight was just the beginning. The fight for Alianeth Arena was set up quickly. It wasn't a grand spectacle, but the tension in the air made it feel like a fight to the death. Jackson and Korak were positioned in the center of a massive open space, surrounded by thousands of Drakari warriors and nobles. The ground beneath them was hard and unforgiving, and the sound of weapons being drawn echoed through the air. Jackson's heart raced, but he kept his breathing steady. He knew he had to keep his head clear. If he let fear take over, he would lose. Korak's sword gleamed in the light as he twirled it, preparing for the first strike. The fight began with an explosive clash. Korak lunged forward, his weapon aimed directly at Jackson's chest. Jackson dodged just in time, the blade missing him by inches. He countered with a swift strike of his own, but Korak parried the blow with ease. His strength unmatched. For every move Jackson made, Korak seemed to be one step ahead. Jackson's arms burned as he fought to keep up, but he refused to back down. His mind raced, his senses heightened. This wasn't just about his survival anymore. It was about protecting the kingdom. It's protecting Aliana and proving that humans could stand side by side with the strongest races in the galaxy. Korak swung his sword with brutal force. But Jackson was faster. With a quick sidestep, he avoided the strike and landed a blow to Korak's side. The Zarathian commander grunted in pain, but recovered quickly, spinning around to face Jackson. "You're a skilled warrior, human," Korak growled, "but you cannot defeat me." Jackson didn't answer. He couldn't afford to waste words. His mind focused solely on the battle, on every movement, every breath. His muscles ached, and his vision blurred, but he couldn't give up. He had to win. With a final burst of strength, Jackson lunged forward, delivering a series of quick, precise strikes that caught Korak off guard. The Zarathian's guard faltered, and in that moment Jackson landed a decisive blow, knocking Korak to the ground. The room erupted into cheers as Jackson stood victorious, his chest heaving with exhaustion. A new beginning King Vilar approached. His eyes filled with a mix of admiration and respect. "Jackson Hayes," he said, his voice steady but filled. "With authority, you have proven yourself worthy. You have fought for your place by Princess Alina's side, and you have earned it." Aliana stepped forward, her eyes meeting Jackson's. There was no fear in them now, only understanding. "You have won," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of finality. "Now we must face whatever comes next together." Jackson didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. His life was no longer just about fighting. It was about standing by the woman he had just promised to protect. Together they would face the challenges ahead, no matter how impossible they seemed. The victory over Korak had stunned the Drakari and the Zarathians alike. Jackson Hayes stood there, his sword still in hand, breathing heavily as the cheers from the gathered crowd echoed in his ears. He had won, but as he looked around at the solemn faces of the royal family, the weight of what had just happened hit him. His victory wasn't just personal, it had altered the very future of the Drakari kingdom. Princess Aliana stood beside him, her royal presence as strong as ever, though there was a slight flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She looked at Jackson, and for the first time her gaze was not just that of a princess, bound by duty, but something more personal, something softer, yet filled with a quiet strength. Jackson could see the conflict in her eyes, The same conflict he had seen in his own reflection 1,000 times before, ever since he first joined the military. Duty and desire, responsibility and freedom, how could one choose between them? The King Vilar moved toward them, his heavy footsteps echoing through the arena. He was a tall, imposing figure, his face weathered by years of ruling and battle. His eyes, however, were filled with an intensity that made even the strongest warriors pause. He stopped just in front of Jackson, who still stood holding his sword. "Jackson Hayes," Vilar said, his voice deep and commanding. "You have proven your strength and your honor in the eyes of the Drakkar. The law is clear. By defeating Korak in the trial of the Chosen, you have claimed your right to marry Princess Aliana." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lena's face remained unreadable, but Jackson could feel the tension radiating from her. She stepped forward, her voice firm but quiet, like a whisper that could still command an army. "I never asked for this," Aliana said. "I did not ask for my life to be dictated by a fight between two men. And yet here we are, caught in a web of laws and traditions that I don't understand." She turned to face Jackson, her violet eyes locking with his. "You fought for me, yes, but did you fight because you care, or because you had no choice?" Jackson felt his heart skip a beat. The princess was asking questions that he had no answers to. Wasn't sure what he was feeling. He had never been in a situation like this before. He was a soldier, trained to fight, not to navigate the complex world of royal politics and traditions. Aliana, Jackson began, his voice steady but unsure. "I never wanted to be in this position. But when I saw what was happening, when I saw the challenge, I didn't think. I acted. I did what I thought was right." Alina's expression softened slightly, but there was still a cloud of uncertainty in her eyes. "And what happens now? Am I supposed to just accept this? Is it marry a human who entered my life by chance, and who has no place in our world?" Before Jackson could answer, the king spoke again, his voice heavy with finality. "This is not a matter of chance, Aliana. Jackson has proven himself worthy. This is the way forward. The future of our people depends on the strength of our alliances, and now this human has become a part of our royal family." Aliana clenched her fists, her gaze shifting toward the ground as though she were trying to gather her thoughts. Jackson could see that she was struggling with this decision just as much as he was. He could feel her discomfort, the pull of duty against personal choice. "I understand," Aliana finally said, her voice softer than before. "But it's not just about the kingdom, is it? It's about me, too." Jackson didn't know what to say. He had fought for the kingdom, but now it seemed he was fighting for Alina's heart as well. He wasn't a prince. He was a soldier. Nothing more. How could he fit into her world, into a life that was so different from his own? Alina's face softened as she looked up at him. "You don't have to fight for my affection, Jackson. But I need to know that you're not just here because of a tradition or because of a law. I need to know that you're here for me, for who I am, not for who I represent." Jackson felt the weight of her words sink into his chest. He had fought, not for glory, but for something deeper. But now, with everything on the line, he realized how much he still didn't understand. This wasn't just a battle for the crown, it was a battle for trust, for connection. The weight of tradition later. That evening, Jackson sat alone in his quarters. The room was dark, lit only by the soft glow of the moon shining through the windows. His mind raced with thoughts of what had happened, of the wedding that never was, and the life that now lay ahead of him. He had been brought to Drukhari Prime as a guest, a warrior among strangers. He had never imagined that his simple presence would turn into something so complicated. The weight of the crown, the expectations, and the future of an entire kingdom now rested on his shoulders. As he sat, his fingers traced the hilt of his sword. He had always found comfort in the feel of the blade, a connection to the battles he had fought, the enemies he had defeated. But this was different. This wasn't a fight against an enemy. It was a fight against tradition, against a future that seemed as uncertain as the stars in the sky. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Jackson stood and walked toward the entrance, wondering who could be visiting him at this hour. When he opened the door, he was surprised to find Princess Aliana standing there, her posture regal but her expression uncertain. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jackson stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She closed the door behind her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was an awkward silence between them, filled with unspoken words and questions that neither of them knew how to ask. Finally, Aliana broke the silence. "I don't know what's happening between us, Jackson. I don't know what you expect from me, or what I'm supposed to expect from you." She paused, her eyes searching his face for answers. "But I need to know that you're here for more than just a crown. I need to know that you're here for me." Jackson didn't know how to answer. He had never been good with words, especially not when it came to matters of the heart. But he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to lose her. "I'm here because I respect you, Liana," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here because I want to protect you and your people. I'm here because this marriage, this future, it's not just about me, it's about us. And I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." Lena's eyes softened, though there was still a hint of doubt in her gaze. "I don't know if that's enough," she whispered. "Don't know if it will ever be enough." Jackson stepped closer, his voice filled with sincerity. "It doesn't have to be perfect. We don't have to know everything right now, but we'll figure it out together." Alina's lips parted as though she wanted to say something more, but then she simply nodded. For the first time since their marriage was decided, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, "but I want to try. I want to try with you." Jackson smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. It wasn't a perfect beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. He didn't have all the answers, and neither did Aliana. But together, they would face whatever came next, side by side. The decision the following day, Jackson was summoned to the royal council. Aliana sat beside her father, the king, her face serious as she prepared for the meeting ahead. Jackson could see the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. This wasn't just about the kingdom anymore. It was about the future of their marriage, the future of Drakari, and the future of their alliance with humanity. As Jackson entered the council chamber, he felt the eyes of the Drakari nobles upon him. They were unsure, hesitant about this union between a human and a Drakari princess. Jackson could feel the tension in the air, but he stood tall, determined to prove that he was more than just a soldier. "The future of the kingdom is in our hands." King Viller began, his voice strong. "Jackson Hayes has proven himself in battle, and he will stand by my daughter's side as her husband. But the question remains, will our people accept this union, or will they fight against it?" The council erupted into heated discussion. Some were in favor of the marriage, believing it would bring peace and unity to the Drakari kingdom. Others were against it, unwilling to accept a human in their royal family. But Aliana, sitting silently beside her father, knew what had to be done. "I will stand by Jackson's side," she said, her voice filled with determination. "This union is not just for our kingdom, it is for the future, and I will not let fear or tradition dictate what we do next." Jackson's heart swelled with pride as he looked at her. She had made her decision. Together they would face whatever came next. The day after the royal council meeting, everything felt different. Now the air in the royal palace seemed heavier, the silence more oppressive. Jackson Hayes had never been part of a royal family, but now he was the husband of Princess Aliana, bound to a kingdom of fierce warriors and deep traditions. The victory and the trial by combat had been just the beginning, and now he had to prove his worth in a world far more complicated than anything he had ever known. Jackson sat in his new quarters, staring out at the Drakari city below. The view from his window was breathtaking, vast stone buildings and towering spires, all surrounded by mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. Yet, despite the beauty of it all, he felt disconnected, like an outsider who had somehow been thrust into the heart of a kingdom that didn't quite know what to do with him, Knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Jackson stood up and opened it to find Aliana standing there, her face a mix of determination and concern. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but quiet. Jackson stepped aside, letting her into the room. He closed the door behind her and leaned against it, waiting for her to speak. Aliana had changed since their marriage was decided. She was still the royal princess, but there was something more human about her now. She had begun to open up, to trust him. And Jackson could see the weight she carried every day. Aliana stood by the window, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared out at the city. "I've been thinking about what comes next. Know how much time we have before the nobles start questioning our marriage again? The council wasn't happy with our decision, and I'm sure the rest of the kingdom feels the same way." Jackson frowned. He had known that there would be resistance, but he hadn't realized how deep it ran. The Drakari had always prided themselves on their traditions, and their royal family was the very heart of their power. A marriage between Aliana and a human could be seen as a threat to everything they stood for. "I know," Jackson said, "but we don't have much choice. We're in this together, Aliana. I'm not going anywhere." Aliana turned to face him, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "I believe you, Jackson. But sometimes, I wonder if I'm making the right choice. What if our union causes more harm than good? What if we can't change the minds of the people?" Jackson walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. I'm here because I believe in you, in this kingdom, and in what we can do together. We can make it work," Aliana smiled, though it was faint. "You always know what to say. But it's not just about words, is it? It's about action. It's about proving that a human can stand with the Drakari, and that a Drakari can stand with a human." Jackson nodded. "Then let's start proving it. We've got a long road ahead of us, but we're not alone. We'll do this together." The first tests the following days were filled with meetings, discussions, and endless debates. Jackson found himself thrust into the political landscape of the Drakari kingdom, a place where warriors weren't just fighters, they were leaders. He had never imagined that a simple soldier like him would have to navigate the complex world of politics and royal duty. But here he was, trying to prove that he was more than just a guest in a foreign land. Aliana stood by his side through it all, offering advice when he needed it and support when the pressure became too much. But there was still a lingering uncertainty in her eyes. The people of the kingdom weren't fully convinced that Jackson belonged here, and they made their disapproval known at every opportunity. One evening, after a particularly tense council meeting, Aliana led Jackson to the balcony of their chambers. The sun had just set, and the stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky. The city below was quiet, as if waiting for something to happen. "Do you ever wonder if we're in over our heads?" Aliana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson leaned against the stone railing, looking out at the city below. "All the time. But I think we have something most people don't have: a chance to build something new, a chance to unite our worlds." Aliana sighed, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I hope you're right. I'm just afraid of what might happen if we fail." Jackson reached out and took her hand. "We won't fail. We'll take it one step at a time, and when the time comes, we'll show everyone that our marriage was more than just a political move. It's the future." Aliana smiled, a true smile this time, and for the first time in days, Jackson felt a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to let anything tear them apart. The growing tension days turned into weeks, and the tension within the Drakari kingdom continued to grow. The nobles, who had once welcomed Jackson's victory with indifference, began to question his place among them. Some openly criticized his marriage to Aliana, calling it a betrayal of Drakari tradition. Others, more quietly, began to stir up resentment, whispering that Jackson was an outsider who had no right to sit on the throne beside their princess. The pressure weighed heavily on Jackson. He had fought wars, but none had been as difficult as this. He couldn't fight these battles with his fists. This war was about politics, about gaining the trust of the people. It was about showing the Drakari that he wasn't just a human warrior, but a man capable of leading them to a better future. One evening, as Jackson sat in a private meeting with the royal council, a messenger arrived with urgent news. The Zarathians, led by Commander Korak, had gathered a fleet at the edge of Drakari space. They were preparing to attack. The room fell silent at the news. The Zarathians had always been a threat, but now they were on the brink of war. Jackson could feel the tension rise in the room as the nobles began to argue over what to do. "We can't let them cross into our space," one of the generals said. "We must prepare for battle." "Wait," Jackson said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned to look at him, and he stood up, meeting their gazes with a calm that surprised even him. "We've been fighting for so long. Maybe it's time for a different approach. It's time to show them that we're stronger together." Aliana, who had been silent until now, nodded in agreement. "We don't have to fight every battle with weapons. Let's show them what we've built. Show them that we are united, that we are not afraid of them." Ouch. His voice steady. "We need to send a message, not just with our weapons, but with our unity. We're stronger together, Drakari and humans alike. And that's what we'll show them." For the first time, the council fell silent, their eyes on Jackson. The Drakari were known for their fierce pride and warrior spirit, but Jackson had just reminded them of something even more powerful: unity. Together they could face any threat. The diplomatic effort, the decision was made, instead of preparing for war, they would send a delegation to meet with the Zarathians and attempt to negotiate peace. The council agreed, and Jackson was chosen to lead the delegation. It wasn't just about proving his strength. It was about proving that a human could lead, could help bring peace to a war-torn galaxy. The journey to the Zarathian fleet was tense. Jackson and Aliana stood side by side on the bridge of the Drakari flagship, staring out at the vastness of space. The tension between the two species was palpable, and Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that their future depended on this moment. When they finally arrived at the Zarathian fleet, Jackson stood before Commander Korak, the man who had once challenged him. Korak's face was hard, his eyes filled with contempt. But there was something else there, to something Jackson couldn't quite place. "This is your last chance," human Korak growled. "Step aside, and I will let your people live." Jackson took a deep breath, steadying himself. "No," he said firmly. "This is not just about you or me. This is about the future of our people. We can either continue to fight, or we can build something better. The choice is yours." For a long moment, there was only silence. But then, something unexpected happened. Korak lowered his weapon. "Perhaps there is something to your words, human," he said slowly. "Perhaps we can talk." A new era. The peace talks lasted for days, but in the end, they succeeded. The Drakari and Zarathians agreed to a ceasefire, marking the beginning of a new alliance. Jackson had proven that he was more than just a warrior. He was a diplomat, a leader who could unite even the fiercest enemies for the sake of peace. When Jackson returned to Drakari Prime, he was no longer just the human warrior who had married the princess. He was a symbol of unity, a man who had helped bridge the gap between two powerful races. As Jackson and Aliana stood together, looking out over the kingdom they had helped save, they knew that their journey was far from over. But they also knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The peace treaty between the Drakari and the Zarathians had been signed. For Jackson Hayes and Princess Aliana, this was a victory beyond their wildest dreams. But the road to peace was never going to be simple, and their union, though strong, was not without its challenges. They had achieved something remarkable. But now they had to prove that this peace could last. Back on Drakari Prime, the mood was mixed. The kingdom had celebrated the treaty, but many still questioned Jackson's place in their royal family. The nobles were divided. Some saw him as the hero who had brought peace. Others saw him as an outsider, a human who had no business sitting at the table with the doctor, Akka. As Jackson and Aliana walked through the royal palace, they could feel the weight of the kingdom's eyes on them. Some of the people had accepted their marriage, while others were still reluctant to trust the union between a human and a Drakari princess. Jackson understood their hesitation. He wasn't a Drakari, and no matter how hard he tried, he knew he would always be an outsider in their eyes. Aliana, walking beside him, was a reminder of everything they had achieved together. She was the daughter of the king, the future ruler, of the Drakari, and her strength had helped Jackson more than she would ever know. But now, it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the future of the entire kingdom, the growing threat. Jackson's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor. He turned to see General Dekar, one of the highest-ranking military officers in the Drakari army, approaching them with urgency in his step. "Your Highness Jackson," Dekar said, bowing respectfully. "There is news you need to hear." "What is it, Dekar?" Aliana asked, her tone sharp with concern. "There have been reports of a growing rebellion in the Eastern Territories," Dekar explained. "Some of the Drakari nobles, still loyal to the old ways, are refusing to accept the treaty with the Zarathians. They claim that this union with humans is a betrayal of our culture and traditions." Jackson could feel the tension rise in Alina's body. This wasn't the first time he had heard of opposition, but the news that it was turning into a rebellion was a serious matter. "Are they planning an attack?" Jackson asked, his military instincts kicking in. "They are gathering forces," Dekar replied. "It is unclear whether they will strike, but they have already begun to rally support from several regions. If we do not act quickly, this could turn into a full-scale civil war." Jackson looked at Aliana, could see the worry in her eyes. But there was also something else, a quiet determination. He knew that she wouldn't let the kingdom fall into chaos. She would fight for it just as he would. "We need to act now," Aliana said, her voice steady. "We cannot let this rebellion spread. Gather our forces, Dekar. We will put an end to this." The march to the Eastern Territories, the days that followed, were filled with tension. Jackson and Aliana stood side by side as they prepared to lead the Drakari forces to the Eastern Territories. They had to show their people that they were not weak, that the unity they had fought for was strong enough to overcome any challenge. Jackson had fought in many wars. This felt different. This was not just about defeating an enemy. It was about protecting everything they had worked for. The stakes were higher than they had ever been before. If they failed, it wouldn't just be a loss for them, it would be a loss for the entire kingdom as they made their way to the eastern border. Jackson could see the soldiers preparing for battle. The Drakari warriors were fierce and loyal, but many of them still saw Jackson as an outsider. They were reluctant to follow a human into battle. Jackson understood their hesitation, but he knew that this was his moment to prove himself, to prove that he was more than just a soldier. He was a leader, just as Aliana was. Aliana had also grown stronger since their marriage. She had learned to lead, to command respect, and Jackson couldn't help but admire her. She was the heart of the Drakari, and together they would stand, strong against any enemy. The march to the Eastern Territories was long and exhausting, but when they finally arrived, the scale of the rebellion was worse than they had anticipated. The rebels, led by some of the most influential Drakari nobles, had gathered a formidable force. They were heavily armed and well-trained, and they were prepared to fight for their beliefs. Jackson stood with Aliana on the front lines facing the rebellion. The air was thick with tension as the two sides prepared for battle. "This is it," Jackson said, his voice low. "This is the test. We have to show them that we won't back down." Aliana nodded. "We will fight for the future of our kingdom. We will not let the past define us." The battle began with a deafening roar as both sides clashed. Jackson fought alongside Aliana, leading the charge. The Drakari warriors fought fiercely, their weapons slashing through the air, but the rebels were determined to defend. Their beliefs. Jackson had always been a warrior, but this battle felt different. This wasn't just about victory. It was about proving that unity could overcome division. As he fought, he could see the doubt in the eyes of some of the Drakari. Soldiers, they didn't believe in him yet. They didn't believe that a human could lead them to victory. But Jackson wasn't going to give up. He couldn't afford to. He fought with everything he had, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he cut through the enemy forces. Aliana was by his side, her own sword flashing as she led her soldiers with unwavering determination. The two of them fought together as equals, as leaders of their people. As the battle raged on, the tide began to turn in their favor. The Drakari forces, united under Aliana and Jackson's leadership, pushed the rebels back. It wasn't easy, but with every blow, with every strike, Jackson could feel the power of unity. They were stronger together, Finally, after what felt like hours, the battle came to an end. The rebels had been defeated, their leaders captured, or killed. The Drakari forces had won, but the victory came at a cost. Many lives had been lost on both sides. As Jackson stood among the fallen, his chest heaving with exhaustion, he looked at Eliana. She was bloodied and bruised, but she was standing tall. She had proven herself as a leader, and so had he. Together, they had faced their greatest challenge yet and emerged victorious. New beginnings of days following the battle were filled with mourning and rebuilding. The Drakari had suffered heavy losses, and many of the nobles who had supported the rebellion were either exiled or imprisoned. The kingdom was shaken, but it was still standing. Jackson and Aliana stood before the royal council once again, this time as equals. The nobles who had once questioned Jackson's place in the royal family now saw him for what he truly was, a leader, a man capable of protecting their kingdom. "I have seen the strength of the Drakari people," Jackson said, his voice steady, as he addressed the council, "but I've also seen the strength that comes from unity. We are stronger when we stand together regardless of our pasts. We must build a future that is not bound by tradition or fear, but by hope." Aliana stood. By his side, her gaze proud as she looked at the council. "The past is behind us. The future is ours to shape. Together, we will lead this kingdom into a new era." The council members nodded, their faces filled with respect. They had witnessed Jackson and Alina's strength, and they knew that the future of the Drakari kingdom was in good hands. As the meeting came to an end, Aliana turned to Jackson, a smile on her face. "We did it," she said softly. Jackson smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. "We did it together." The road ahead would not be easy, but Jackson and Aliana knew that as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't face. They had proven that unity could overcome any challenge, and together, they would build a future that was stronger than ever before.